The modern landscape of Chicago is a testament to raw, unyielding American enterprise, a vertical city of ambition, speed, and unforgiving progress. Yet to truly understand its nature, one must look beneath the surface. Beneath the frantic, luminous loop lies a vast, silent, and structurally complex subterranean world, the foundational skeleton of the Chicago L train system. This network is not just steel and track, it is the city's geological unconscious, the repository of its deepest, most hidden anxieties. And every single night, for a precise, chilling 2-hour interregnum between 2:30 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., the system pauses. The city's circulatory rhythm ceases. In that profound, absolute vacuum, the dark truth of the deep loop is made manifest. I am Elias Vance, a historian dedicated not to celebrated transit milestones, but to systemic failures and forgotten infrastructure. My singular, consuming fixation became the Chicago Deep Loop, a ghost network of tunnels constructed during the initial chaotic expansion of the 1920s. These lines, driven impossibly deep beneath the bedrock of the financial core, were deemed structurally unsound and financially ruinous. They were officially sealed, abandoned, and meticulously erased from all public schematics, but they were never inert. The horrifying urban legend attached to this forgotten geography is the 3 a.m. phantom. This is no flickering, quaint steam engine ghost. It is a single, spectral train that runs a precise, repeating loop within the sealed S-line. Its function transcends mere transport. It is a mechanism for psychological classification, energy harvesting, and archiving. The legend is terrifyingly specific. Anyone who boards the Phantom is instantly pulled into an eternal, recurring loop. This loop is not physical or chronological, it is cognitive and traumatic. The train forces its passenger to experience, with perfect, agonizing fidelity, the singular, most devastating, unresolved moment of their entire life, a catastrophic professional failure, an irreversible loss of reputation or love, a core, unmanageable regret. This recurrence is absolute and continuous, lasting until the passenger's cognitive energy, their emotional residue, is entirely consumed and permanently imprinted onto the manganese steel of the tracks. The track itself functions as a self-writing, permanent geological archive of sustained, quantified human despair. My professional curiosity quickly dissolved into forensic desperation. I cross-referenced decades of police records with archived transit data. The missing person database revealed a statistically impossible spike of disappearances every year, clustered near the winter solstice. Every single victim vanished between 2:58 a.m. and 3:05 a.m., and all their final transit card pings were logged at one single sealed platform, a station officially inactive since the 1950s. These were not random acts of urban crime. They were systematic, surgical extractions performed by a highly controlled mechanism. The foundation of the phenomenon was rooted in the disaster of the Great Chicago Tunnel Fire of 1957. While publicly blamed on engineering failure, a suppressed military assessment detailed a temporal resonance cascade triggered when the intense, prolonged heat of the fire reacted with the specific geological structure of the undercity. The bedrock beneath the loop is uniquely rich in crystalline silicon and magnetite, a rare natural piezoelectric conduit capable of storing and amplifying vast amounts of psycho-emotional energy. The fire had not caused damage, it had acoustically and energetically activated a massive, psychoreactive data storage system. Following the disaster, a hidden, heavily armored monitoring station, the Kronos Hub, was established by a sophisticated, clandestine government entity. Their objective was not rescue, but energy management and trauma exploitation.
My own personal entry into this nightmare was sealed by the loss of my brother, Michael. A reliable, essential man, he was ingested by the system 3 years ago. His transit card pinged at 3:01 a.m. at that one sealed platform. I knew with absolute certainty that his intense lifelong pattern of self-blame and regret was now the literal generating power source for the track he vanished on. I had to locate the deep loop, board the 3 a.m. phantom, and confront the archive that held my brother hostage. Part 2. The infrasound frequency and archive. To successfully breach the multi-layered seals of the S-line, I required the expertise of the man who held the city's guilt, Arthur Finch. The former city engineer, a public pariah since 1957, was found living in a self-imposed, lightless prison of blueprints and consumed by decades of unmanageable silence. Finch's knowledge transcended the paranormal. It was rooted in material science and acoustic physics. He explained that the deep loop tracks were intentionally laid with a high-resonance manganese steel alloy. The fire had acoustically tuned this steel, creating a permanent, systemic acoustic distortion, a standing, ultra-low infrasound frequency running through the rail lines. This frequency, biologically below the range of human hearing, perfectly and violently resonates with the neural pathways governing emotional memory and trauma consolidation. The 3 a.m. phantom is merely the physical vessel required to achieve temporal alignment and concentrate the diffuse psychic energy for archiving. Finch provided my essential kit, the magnetic access card for the S-line maintenance shaft, and a heavily insulated frequency dampener headset. He stressed that the dampener was the only thing preventing immediate cognitive synchronization. His final warning was a chilling social physics. The Phantom operates a multi-user feedback loop. The moment you board, the trauma of every passenger is instantly synchronized, layered, and fed back to every other passenger, guaranteeing a rapid and total collapse of the individual ego into a collective, system-sustaining scream. The descent into the S-line was a physical assault on my sanity. The air in the maintenance shaft was cold, viscous, and saturated with the metallic odor of corrosion and the profound, tangible smell of human fear. I navigated the miles of silent, twisting track, the darkness so overwhelming it felt like a pressure against my skin. My specialized sensors confirmed zero conventional radiation, but indicated an astronomical level of residual psycho-emotional energy, a highly concentrated, geological signature of persistent regret.
I finally located the Chronos Hub, a massive, heavily disguised structure built directly into a geological fault line. The entry was a fortress of lead-lined, blast-proof doors. Inside, the equipment was shockingly advanced, not weapons, but colossal server farms and telemetry arrays. Massive, blinking supercomputers displayed complex, turbulent neurological wave patterns superimposed onto the loop's digital grid. This was unambiguously a psychological data farm. The clandestine entity running the hub was actively harvesting the data, cataloging the infinite resource of human emotional failure and quantifying it as a manageable, exploitable energy source. The centerpiece of the hub was a monitoring station locked onto a single, repeating target. A continuous video feed showed a man sitting alone on an aged train bench, his head bowed, his face a void of perpetual despair. The designation above him was the final, devastating confirmation. Michael Vance, Subject Anchor 001. My brother was the system's primary battery, the generator of infinite regret, his suffering the kinetic fuel for the entire deep loop mechanism. Part 3. Boarding the 3 a.m. Phantom. The chronometer was flashing 2:59 a.m. My final desperate attempt to disrupt the hub's security had failed. The ground beneath my feet began to vibrate with a low, deep hum, the infrasound frequency rising to its cyclical, consuming peak. The hum intensified to a deafening, monstrous roar, resonating through my skull and deep into the bedrock. A light appeared far down the tunnel, not a simple service light, but a sickly, luminous white pulse, the color of exposed, burning energy. The train, a perfectly preserved relic from the 1940s, glided to a silent stop at the platform. The doors hissed open, expelling a wave of sterile, static-charged air. The frequency dampener felt like a prayer, my only protection. I crossed the threshold into the nightmare. The interior was a museum of mid-century transit design, yet the atmosphere was a crushing, physical weight. The air was thick, heavy with the unbearable density of shared, continuous, amplified grief. 7 other passengers occupied the car. They were the refugees of trauma, their physical forms present, their consciousnesses permanently locked into singular, frozen moments of terminal despair. The moment the doors hissed shut, the train began to move, silently accelerating. The infrasound frequency struck with the force of a sudden vacuum. Despite the dampener, my cognitive defenses were instantaneously and brutally overridden. The loop began with a blinding, sonic jolt. My own core trauma, the paralyzing image of my brother's final, static-filled voicemail, was not merely recalled, it was physically imposed on my mind. I heard the whisper and the static, but layered over it was the overwhelming scream of collective psychological pain. The financial executive, 1988, was convulsing, physically reliving the moment his signature damned his company. The failure is permanent. I signed the destruction. I destroyed them all. I destroyed them all. The young runaway, 2010, was now a mass of silent rhythmic weeping, her final unsaid apology a loop of pure, relentless, unmanageable guilt. The profound horror was the synchronicity and amplification. The train was not a passive container, it was a psychological supercollider that forced us to exchange our core, most self-destructive memories, creating a geometrically accelerating wave of mutual compounding despair. I simultaneously experienced the executive's terror of economic and social annihilation, the runaway's crushing self-hatred, and the cold, terminal grief of the passenger from the 1970s who simply repeated the phrase, "I missed the exit. I missed the exit." The train was an emotional superconductor, a perfect self-sustaining echo chamber where pain fed upon itself, draining the passenger's vital cognitive energy for the system. I forced myself to move through the cars, each one a progressively deeper, distinct circle of psychological torment. The third car was filled with the deafening static of 1,000 final arguments that would never conclude, forcing me to cover my ears against the sound of permanent, unresolvable conflict. The fourth car was oppressively dark, a total physical replication of terminal isolation, where the absence of light was the absolute, final absence of hope. The psychic pressure was a searing, structural pain in my skull, threatening to fuse my consciousness with the collective archive. I reached the final car. Michael, the primary anchor, sat alone. His presence was the axis of the entire nightmare. I activated the cognitive disruptor, the only device capable of temporarily overwhelming the loop's massive resonance field. The loop ceased with an absolute, shocking silence. The chaos, the screaming, the crushing psychic density vanished, replaced by an absolute, profound emptiness that felt colder than any vacuum. Michael slowly raised his head, his eyes showing recognition, followed by an immense, soul-deep weariness that suggested millennia of endurance. I spoke with frantic urgency, detailing the phantom, the archive, the military's clinical, data-driven harvest. His response was delivered with the terrifying finality of a man who had transcended his own humanity. "Alex," he whispered, his voice dry and hollow, yet infused with immense, tragic authority. "You don't understand the systemic physics. You can't break the loop. The loop is anchored to me. My core regret is the only thing stabilizing the fracture. He elaborated on his sacrifice. His specific, unforgivable mistake, a life-altering failure that had destroyed his future, was so potent that when the infrasound frequency hit, it found the perfect resonant harmonic. His sustained, powerful psychological energy became the train's primary motor, the core energy source for the entire deep loop network. The tracks weren't just storing data, they were running on the raw, contained, infinite energy of his regret. He then revealed the catastrophic paradox. If I severed him from the system, if I stopped his heart or disconnected the loop, the sudden, massive, uncontrolled release of his contained, infinite trauma energy would generate a system-wide psychic cascade. This emotional shockwave would instantly spread through the connected L lines, broadcasting decades of accumulated, archived sorrow, regret, and terror into the minds of every unaware Chicago commuter. The result would not be chaos, but a sudden, synchronized, mass psychological collapse, destroying the city's collective stability. Michael was not a victim, he was a self-chosen psychological martyr. He was consciously riding his eternal loop to act as a containment field, stabilizing the entire psychoacoustic infrastructure and shielding millions from the collective, destructive trauma stored beneath their daily lives.
The cognitive disruptor began to flicker, its temporary alignment failing. The train's infrasound hum returned, accelerating into a distinct mechanical sound of consuming hunger. The other refugees began to stir, their vacant eyes locking onto me, the intruder. Their synchronized despair was actively trying to pull me into the system as a secondary anchor. Part 5. Escape and the lingering frequency. The choice was no longer ethical, it was mathematical. Saving my brother meant guaranteeing the psychic ruin of the city. My escape was the only possible action. I violently destroyed the cognitive disruptor, ensuring no accidental disconnect could trigger the cascade and confirming Michael's eternal fate. I backed away, watching his final, peaceful smile, a man accepting an eternal, necessary damnation. The refugee executive's face was now a perfect, screaming reflection of my own regret, shouting Michael's name, confirming that my trauma was officially integrated into the system's database. I threw myself against the emergency door, plunging onto the gravel as the train momentarily paused at a remote maintenance junction. I tumbled into the absolute darkness, narrowly avoiding the train's massive wheels as the 3 a.m. Phantom instantly accelerated, its sickly white light vanishing down the track to begin its endless cycle once more. I crawled back to the defunct Cronus hub. The monitor still displayed the unchanging data. Michael Vance, Subject Anchor 001, Continuous Loop. The military had their power source. They were simply measuring the terrifying, clinical efficiency of perpetual human despair. I spent the next 2 hours enacting absolute structural sabotage. I used explosives to detonate the main neurological telemetry servers, cracked the liquid-cooled cores with a crowbar, and severed every data, power, and acoustic cable, ensuring they could not harvest new energy or expand their archive tonight. The hub was not just offline, it was geologically neutralized. I fled the tunnels just as the first clean light of the 4:30 a.m. service cycle began to illuminate the city streets above. The Phantom train still runs. The pattern of missing persons near the winter solstice continues, a silent, annual tax the city pays for its temporary stability. But most terrifying and subtle consequence is the lingering frequency and psychological residue. The city is permanently infected. Commuters on the L now regularly report intense, inexplicable flashes of irrational, non-contextual guilt, paralyzing anxiety, or profound, sudden existential dread, almost always when the train passes directly over the deep loop's hidden path.
These are the micro-leaks, tiny, powerful bursts of Michael's sustained misery, briefly infecting the public consciousness. People rationalize these intrusive thoughts, blaming exhaustion, stress, or the crushing pressure of urban life. They are unaware they are experiencing second-hand trauma. But I know the truth. The city of Chicago is not built on steel. It is built on the endless, agonizing regret of my brother. The military is still running its surveillance operation under the guise of infrastructure maintenance, desperately trying to restore the hub's data capture, hungry for the power of human failure. Every morning, I watch the commuters, rushing into their day oblivious that their transit runs over a ghost train powered by an infinite loop of human despair. We are all living on the surface of a sealed, psychological disaster. The 3 a.m. transit may never end, and as long as Michael is riding that loop, the city's trauma is merely contained, never truly gone. The ultimate nightmare is not being haunted by a ghost, but realizing that your consciousness is a quantifiable energy resource and you are riding the ghost of someone else's contained pain, a perpetual cycle controlled by a power structure obsessed with weaponizing human regret. Watch the L at night. Listen to the silence between the trains. You might just hear the faint, agonizing hum of the deep loop, archiving your life, one regretful second at a time.